people who've experienced the paranormal or seen cryptids or other unknown creatures. What's your story? My grandmother was a Cajun voodoo black witch. Dark, serious stuff. Everyone in the family was convinced she had a place waiting for her in hell. She was not a big woman, maybe 5 feet tall and around 100 pounds. At her funeral, 4 men carried her casket from the funeral home to the hearse. At the church, it took 6 men to lift her out. It took 8 men to carry her into the cemetery. As she seemed to grow heavier, the closer they got to her grave. By the time they reached the actual gravesite, it required 10 men to carry her. When we returned to her house, where the rest of the family was gathered, my uncle and I went into the kitchen. It was hot, like opening an oven, despite it being mid-February in a country house with no electricity. Inside that kitchen, we both saw my grandmother, the same woman we had just buried, holding hands with 4 other women. I didn't recognize them, but my uncle did. One was our grandmother's sister, who had died, and another was our grandmother's mother, dead long before. We left immediately. None of us have set foot in that house since. That was nearly 30 years ago. Story 2. One night, my wife came home to our small apartment complex in Midtown. It was about 10 o'clock, and I was taking the trash to the dumpster in the alley behind our building. There were only 6 two-story units, all with front doors facing south. We lived in number 5. When you walked outside and opened the door, there was a small raised landing where a welcome mat would go. After stepping off the landing, you were on a walkway that ran in both directions, but you had to choose left or right because a tall wooden fence blocked the way straight ahead, separating our complex from the large house next door. If you turned right and walked past apartments 4 through 1, you reached a gate. Going through it put you on one of the main streets in Midtown. If you turned left coming out of our apartment, you would pass number 6, then the laundry room, and immediately reach a wrought iron gate. Just beyond it was the dumpster. It was a very short distance from our door, and because nothing blocked the view, you could see clearly from the dumpster all the way down the walkway to the gate at the opposite end of the complex. The entire area was well lit. Every unit turned on its porch light each night, and there was a street light next to the dumpster, with another near the street side gate. From where I stood, it was easy to see my wife open the gate and walk up the path toward our apartment. I waved at her, surprised she didn't notice me. I considered calling out, but I didn't want to scare her or startle any neighbors. I finished emptying the trash and started walking the short distance toward her. As I was heading back, I saw our apartment door open. I assumed she had opened it, though I didn't actually see her do it because it was dark. She leaned inside, and I could hear her calling my name, but she wouldn't step into the apartment. It was strange. It was our own place, so why wouldn't she walk right in? When I reached her from behind and said hello, she panicked. She kept asking, "How the fuck did you do that? How did you get back outside?" I told her I had been at the dumpster taking out the trash, but she cut me off and said, "No, you opened the door for me and walked upstairs. I called after you, and you turned and looked at me but didn't say anything. You just kept walking." Then she started crying. I searched the apartment, but found nothing. We moved about 6 months later to the house where we live now. Not long after moving in, she thought she saw me walk past the kitchen windows that look into the backyard. It wasn't me. She said it looked exactly like me and walked all the way around the house before disappearing. And then she realized I was in the bedroom the whole time. Creepy stuff. Just to be clear, we're not believers. We don't see the paranormal in everyday life, have no history of seeing ghosts or spirits. We're not ghost hunters. We're not religious, and we're not involved with any cults. We don't worship anything. Hell, I don't even listen to Slayer all that much anymore. We're rational adults with a family and careers, and we always look for explanations that make sense and can be backed by science. My wife has no mental or physical health issues that would make her see something like this. And while I am bipolar, I didn't witness it myself, and my bipolar disorder doesn't cause hallucinations. I've never experienced anything like that. I think that's more of an LSD thing, honestly. Anyway, I just wanted to make that clear. Story 3. This is my mom's story. I'm originally from a Southeast Asian country. My mom grew up dirt poor. Her family was essentially squatting in a 2-story house on the edge of the village. If you walked out the back door, you stepped straight into the jungle. My granddad had already passed away, and my grandma used to leave my mom and her sisters alone in that house while she worked about 8 hours away. She would return every 2 weeks or so. At the time, my mom was 9. My eldest aunt was 11, and the youngest was 7. At night, there was no electricity, so they used candles. The master bedroom upstairs had a balcony, but it was poorly designed. From inside the room, you couldn't properly see onto the balcony, only vague shapes and silhouettes. One night, around 10 o'clock, my aunt walked past the master bedroom and casually looked in. She said she saw a massive silhouette perched on the balcony railing. Even sitting, she said it was easily 7 or 8 feet tall, far too large to be human. According to her, the figure appeared nearly every night around 10 and disappeared around midnight. This went on for months. They eventually moved away. Story 4. I'm a huge skeptic when it comes to anything paranormal. I love reading stories like this because I can still be skeptical, but I've had a couple of moments that shook me, and one in particular still makes my blood run cold. A friend of mine, a former Marine, found a large abandoned building in a public park in upstate New York. It was the middle of the day, and we weren't expecting to find anything like it. The building was stable enough to walk through, but parts of the wall were missing, and we could clearly see that no one else was around. Inside was just rubble and graffiti. Nothing exciting at first. We went upstairs, and I noticed some satanic graffiti on one wall. I pointed it out, and we laughed. We're both metalheads and into the occult, so we didn't think anything of it. Then I opened a door that led to a small office. Directly in front of me was a floor-to-ceiling pentagram, painted in what looked like thick oil paint. The room was completely empty. No furniture, nothing else. We stood there for a moment. As I stepped forward, I suddenly heard, "Get out," in a voice that was calm but stern. It was like it came from inside my own head. Before I could react, my friend bolted in the opposite direction. I ran after him, and when we finally got outside, he looked at me wide-eyed and asked, "Did you hear it?" He said he heard the same voice, but to him, it sounded like it came from behind us. I've never felt anything like that. It still gives me goosebumps. I want to explain it away, but I can't come up with anything that makes sense. Story 5. This happened to me when I was 6. I was in bed, sound asleep, when I felt the mattress beside me slowly shift, as if someone were lying down next to me. I opened my eyes and saw a full-grown adult woman in my bed. She didn't look frightening, just a normal woman, but she was a complete stranger, and she was beside me. I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could, she put a finger to her lips, as if to tell me to stay quiet. Her eyes looked terrified, like she was silently pleading with me not to make a sound. Of course, I screamed my head off. I heard my parents jump out of bed. The woman just looked incredibly sad, her eyes filling with tears. As soon as my dad turned on the light, she was gone, completely gone. No sign of her at all. I slept in my parents' room that night. I was scared, but even more than that, I had a deep feeling of sadness I couldn't explain. That was decades ago, and I still remember it clearly. I've had a few other moments like that since then. Different people, but never that same woman. Story 6. Working on ships, especially older ones, you hear some strange stories. About 4 years ago, during a South American season, I used to hang out with the Brazilian crew. They were fun and easygoing, and one of them was the gift shop manager. He would constantly rant about his staff, how lazy they were, and how they kept trying to avoid working by claiming they saw a little girl running around the gift shop. One night, we were having coffee with the head of the photography department, and the gift shop manager was extra salty, complaining that he'd have to work a few extra hours because his team refused to go back in there. In the middle of the night, I got a call from the photo manager. She told me our friend was in her cabin, crying and shaking. I rushed over, thinking he'd gotten terrible news from home or something like that. Instead, he told us he had been working in his office. The door faced a long mirror that covered most of the wall in the clothing section. After hearing giggling, he saw the shadow of a child in the mirror, as if she were leaning in to peek through the doorway while trying to hide, but she was only visible in the reflection. He said he immediately jumped up and ran out as the giggling continued, followed by the sound of tiny feet running around the shop, and then into the casino on the same deck. I'm not big into the paranormal, but the next day I mentioned the story to my boss. She told me that about 20 years earlier, a little girl had come out of the theater with her parents. She ran ahead of them, looping around the gift shop, and eventually ran into the casino. She came out near the atrium, where there was a large opening with glass elevators that went from deck 12 down to deck 5. She leaned over the railing to look down, lost her balance, and fell. She broke her neck on impact and died. Apparently, sightings of her in the gift shop and casino were common. Story 7. Okay, so it's not exactly a cryptid. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but I'm pretty sure I met a skinwalker. Pennsylvania suburbs, late spring. It was long past evening and pitch black outside. The crickets were loud as hell, and my brother and I were hanging out in our room with the window open. We had a screen on it, of course. I got up to go to the bathroom. While I was in there, I suddenly heard my brother talking. What struck me was that I hadn't heard our mom walk down the hall. I finished, stepped out into the hallway, and looked into our room. My brother was standing by the window, talking to some random guy. Our window faced the front of the house, but the room was on a corner. To the left of the window was a short but dense patch of woods. Our suburb was split by big roads, and between them were pockets of trees like that. The guy was rambling about something. I can't remember what exactly, but he said he was looking for someone or something. He kept asking, "Have you seen my thing?" Again and again. My brother kept telling him no, repeating himself louder each time. Finally, realizing the guy wouldn't stop, my brother just shut the window. Only a few moments later, we heard the front doorknob rattle. Thank God, we always lock it after hours. With no way in, the guy seemed to just disappear. And I don't mean he walked away. We had a clear view of most of the front yard, and we never saw him step off the porch after he tried the handle. Being nosy, I peeked through the blinds. Nothing. Nowhere. No movement. No shadow. Nobody walking away. How the hell did we not see this man leave? I asked my brother to explain everything from the start. He retold it just as I'd witnessed it, except he added one detail. The guy had come out of the woods, that dense patch right next to our house, in the dead of night. We told our mom the next morning, and she brushed it off as some druggie wandering around. But thinking back on other creepy things that happened when we lived there, like a random air raid siren going off sometimes for no reason, I'm way more inclined to believe something stranger was going on. I'm pretty sure that random guy wasn't just a wanderer. I honestly think I met a skinwalker or something. Story 8. In my first year of university, a girl I lived with had a friend over one night. He'd been filming on London Bridge at about 3 a.m, trying to capture footage of it completely empty. When he arrived, he was shaken and kept insisting we watch the video with the volume turned all the way up and listen closely. Around the 1-minute mark, I heard a low, menacing whisper, "As you walk the devil's path," then something I couldn't make out, and finally, death. The voice felt final, cold, and deeply wrong. He turned to us and asked, "Did you hear it?" I said I heard a voice. "What did it say?" he asked. I repeated the words. He went pale. "You heard the exact same thing I did. You're not the first." My housemate spoke up and said she'd heard the same thing. He explained that he hadn't heard anything while he was on the bridge. The voice only appeared when he worked on the audio later, and he'd shown it to other people who claimed they heard the same whisper. I don't have any other paranormal stories, so this isn't part of a pattern or anything. I'm usually skeptical of this type of thing, but this still scares me. Whatever was on that bridge at night wanted to make itself known. I never want to find out what it was. Story 9. My sister and I were going to a late church service. It was already dark outside, and she likes to walk around the church garden before service starts. She asked me to go with her, but I didn't feel like it, so I stayed inside, listening to music on my phone and scrolling through social media. She came back about 15 minutes later, looking confused. "How'd you get here so fast?" "What? You were right behind me. I didn't see you walk past me." I told her I'd been there the whole time. She looked shaken and explained that she had seen me in the garden, sitting on the bench in the center. She tried talking to me, but I didn't respond. She figured I was just listening to music and didn't want to talk, so she walked around a little longer. Then the church bells rang, signaling that the service was about to start. She called out to me, telling me it was time, and headed for the entrance. That's when she saw the real me, already inside. She swears it looked exactly like me. Same hair color, same haircut, same dress. I figure it was a doppelganger, especially since I've heard they usually don't respond when someone tries to interact with them. Not really my story, but I was there. Story 10. I used to live in a 100-year-old mansion that had originally been built as a small asylum. I saw a woman in the kitchen around dusk once, but she didn't scare me. I actually felt peaceful when I saw her, and I was never afraid. The basement was a different story. It always felt off down there, and I hated going into it. A friend of mine, who said she could sense things because her grandmother was a bruja and had taught her, came over and said, "Nothing in this house wants to hurt you, but the thing in the basement wants to be left alone." I was like, "Cool, me too, dude," and left it at that. Later, my roommate and I were talking about the history of the house, and she mentioned that before I moved in, another friend had come over to cleanse the space. She said she got rid of anything negative, but the most important thing to remember was that the thing in the basement just wants to be left alone. Nope, absolutely not. I don't care if I don't believe in ghosts. When two unrelated people tell me the exact same thing about a basement, I'm out. Story 11. Several years ago, some friends and I were driving through one of the many small towns along the North South Carolina border in the mountains. It was well after midnight. My friend looked behind us and saw a pair of headlights approaching quickly, easily 60 to 70 miles per hour in a 25-mile-per-hour zone. Seeing no signs of slowing, my friend pulled over to let the car pass. What passed us, however, were just two lights, far too bright to be fireflies or any natural luminescent creature. Headlight bright, if not brighter, not attached to anything. No car, nothing. Just two lights racing down the road. Story 12. After my father passed away, I went to stay with my friend and his mom for a while. Things with my own mom were very strained, and even though I didn't want to stay at someone else's house, they didn't want me to be alone during that time. I had always felt uneasy sleeping anywhere but home. On my first night there, early in the morning, I woke to the sound of my bedroom door opening. A man wearing a red flannel shirt and denim bib overalls walked in, carrying a bag of tools. He turned on the light, looked at me, and then walked through a doorway that led to the utility room. I drifted back to sleep soon after. When I woke up again, the room was dark, and nothing had changed from the way it looked when I went to bed the night before. Figuring I must have imagined the whole thing, I went upstairs for coffee and asked my friend's mom if the man in overalls was still around. She gave me a strange look and told me it had only been the two of us in the house all night. Now completely confused, I described him in detail. His height, build, clothes, and even his facial hair. She turned pale, rushed to her room, and came back with a photograph. When she showed it to me, it was the exact same man I had seen in the basement that morning, wearing the same clothes. She then told me he had passed away nearly 30 years earlier. He had been her grandfather, the original owner of the property. He had taken his own life to save the farm after investing all his money in horses instead of machines, a choice that failed and put everything at risk. To prevent the bank from taking the land, he went out on a stormy night, carried a lightning rod into the middle of a pond, and let nature do the rest. His life insurance paid out because the lightning strike was considered accidental, and his death saved the family dairy and kept their home from foreclosure. Story 13. From the hospital prison wing. There are two rooms. I'll call them 123 and 234, which share a wall. The hospital isn't that old, built in the 1970s, and it's a small town county hospital. We don't handle trauma cases, and when one does come in, it's only to stabilize the patient until EMS or life flight can transfer them elsewhere. Deaths in these rooms are usually older patients and from natural causes. The prison wing has been operating for about 8 years, and when prisoners die here, it's also from natural causes. But this particular set of rooms is just strange. I'm an agnostic atheist, but I can't explain the same thing that keeps happening in 123, and especially in 234. There's a kid involved. There have been several instances where, just before they pass, inmates talk about a kid in the room. It's usually those who are delirious before death. There have also been several mentally altered offenders, not drug-addled, but truly altered in mental status, who have either talked about or completely lost it over a kid under their bed, running around, or messing with them. One inmate became so violent that we had to discharge him from the hospital back to his unit, not solely because of the kid, but it seemed to be part of the problem. Occasionally, an inmate with full mental capacity would mention that a TV in another room was so loud he could hear it, claiming it sounded like a kid's show or children talking. I made sure to keep my hallway quiet and never let the TVs in the hall be audible. Some might argue that word of mouth about the kid spread to the units, but neither officers nor nurses made a habit of telling stories to inmates. Besides, we admit offenders from dozens of different units. Story 14. I grew up deep in Louisiana, and I could tell stories all night, but the one I remember most, though it sounds like complete nonsense, is the Rougarou, or dogman, that used to sit in the clearing past our driveway. I was a typical rebellious emo teenager, sneaking out to smoke and stay up late. Our house sat along a highway with nothing around for miles in either direction. No towns, no neighbors, just woods. The only light anywhere near us was a huge searchlight past the garage, and living on a big stretch of land meant anything from coyotes to panthers could wander out of the woods like it was normal. I was used to that. What I wasn't used to was the thing that would sit in the clearing from time to time, especially during the winter. It would sit right under the searchlight, like a person would sit on the ground with their legs stretched out, holding its tail and picking at the dirt. At first, I figured it had to be a coyote or some kind of wolf on steroids. Then, one night, I made the classic stupid white guy in a horror movie decision. I stepped outside and whistled at it. Maybe it was just a stray dog. That's what I told myself, until the night it scrambled onto its feet and stood upright. It stared straight at me, then hopped over the chain link fence and ran out onto the deserted highway. After that, it came back every few weeks, usually late at night or early in the morning. Sometimes it sat in the clearing, digging at crawfish holes. Other times, it squatted at the end of the gravel driveway. On those nights, I stopped going outside to smoke and just used the laundry room instead. I used to have photos of the torn-up crawfish mounds, but I haven't had that phone since 2013. I moved away years later, and sometimes I still wonder if it's out there. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me. The property itself always felt wrong, haunted, or maybe holding bodies no one ever talked about. The headstones behind the barn freaked me out, but not as much as the rougarou. I still dream about the way it stared at me. Nobody ever believed me, but my dog and I know what we saw, night after night. Story 15. Almost nobody has heard this story, and few would believe it. Yet the first months in an old house are burned into memory. It might sound crazy, but nothing was imagined. From the first moment, the house thrummed with a strange, subtle energy, easy to dismiss, yet impossible to ignore. Small, unsettling moments appeared, quietly at first, then escalating. Doors, lights, and cupboards acted on their own, and shadowy figures seemed to watch from the corners. Logic offered no answers, leaving a lingering sense that some things exist beyond understanding, and once seen, they never quite leave you. Paranormal stuff has always been met with skepticism here, usually explained logically first, and even now that approach is tried, but some of what happened simply cannot be explained. I used to live with a girlfriend in the basement of her family home, a space that carried a quiet heaviness from the moment we stepped in. I won't dive into unnecessary details, but from what I understood, some troubling things had taken place there long before we ever moved in. Before us, the family had rented it out to different tenants, and the plan was for her mother and brother to move back into the upstairs portion after about 1 month, which is exactly what happened. From the very first day, there was an unmistakable energy lingering in the basement, something subtle but consistently unsettling, like the air itself held onto old echoes we couldn't quite name. Even the house itself had a peculiar, almost disjointed character. It was an older 4-tiered, split-level home, which essentially meant 2 stories divided by 3 small sets of half stairwells, creating an odd feeling of being both open and cramped at the same time. The place hadn't been maintained well, and we quickly realized we had far more work ahead of us than expected. The upper portion of our basement suite consisted of one large open space that blended the kitchenette, the living room, and the bathroom area together, giving the whole level a slightly unfinished, transitional feel, as if it never decided what it wanted to be. The lowest level was a storage area with the hot water tank, the laundry room, a ground-level exit to the backyard, and at the very back was our bedroom. The lowest level had concrete floors, battered walls painted black and red, and was relatively unfinished, the exception being our bedroom, which had hardwood floors. The contrast between the bare, rough storage area and the warmth of the bedroom was oddly stark, adding to the sense of unease. The weirdness began with the storage room light. There was no door, and seemingly more often than not, whenever I walked past, the light would be on. At first, I didn't think much of it, and just flicked it off on my way by. However, it became so frequent that I eventually brought it up. Nobody claimed to have been in there recently, and we were usually all good about power usage. It was strange that a room so rarely visited would consistently have its light on. My girlfriend swore she wasn't the one leaving it on, nor her brother or her mother, whose laundry room was just across the hall. It kept happening, and I assumed someone was strangely fixated on turning the light on and leaving it that way. One time, my girlfriend, her brother, and her mother left town for a couple of days, so I was alone in the house. Every time I walked by the storage room, the light was on. I admit I was a little freaked out, but I tried to convince myself it must be a wiring issue. That is, until I realized that each time I flicked the light switch downward, with the same downward hand motion every time, the switch was physically being pushed upward. This, I had no explanation for. It was simply bizarre, unsettling in a way I couldn't rationalize. During this period, 2 other strange occurrences became noticeable. One was the TV. It often turned into static unexpectedly. This was in about 2010, and we had a relatively new TV, so it seemed particularly odd that it would turn itself on and go to static. If I turned it on myself, it always stayed on the last channel I had used, yet many times I would come home from work or wake up and find it already on static. Weird, yet I kept trying to rationalize it. The other occurrence involved the cupboards. They seemed to open themselves constantly, all the time. Naturally, I tried to reason it out, thinking perhaps the doors were off level. But whenever I tested this theory, the cupboards stayed shut. I also noticed, several times, faint, oddly paced footsteps upstairs. Very deliberate, slow, and perfectly timed. They didn't resemble normal walking. Sometimes the family was home upstairs, yet the sound remained distinct, eerie in its rhythm. On one occasion, when nobody was home, I heard footsteps moving up and down the stairs repeatedly. I went upstairs to investigate, and as expected, nobody was there. Now, here's the night things truly escalated. My girlfriend and I were in our living room watching TV late at night. Nobody was home upstairs. Her brother was out with friends. Her mother was somewhere. I don't recall. Around 10:30 or 11, a sudden crash echoed from upstairs, and we both jumped in alarm. I grabbed the first improvised weapon I could find, a wine bottle, and summoned the courage to investigate. My girlfriend behind me. There was nobody there. However, a wall-mounted basket-hanging shelf, for lack of a better term, which was used to hold things like keys, gloves, perfume, and an assortment of other items her mother had been knocked to the floor. Everything inside it was strewn across the room, all the way across. At first, I assumed it had simply fallen under its own weight, until I went to put it back. That's when I noticed the nail that held it in, lying on the ground as well, had been placed into the drywall at a 45-degree downward angle. There was no bend in the screw, no damage to the drywall, as there would have been if it had merely fallen. The nail had been physically pulled out, and that fact alone sent a chill down my spine. With this evidence before us, both of us began to feel increasingly freaked out. We had been somewhat tormented by these odd occurrences over the past few months, and the events seemed to be intensifying. Doubts crept into our minds. Were we losing it? Perhaps it was time to just try to sleep, so we reluctantly decided to head to bed, hearts pounding and nerves frayed. Around 3 a.m., we both, at the same moment, jolted upright into a sitting position and gasped in unison. At the foot of the bed stood the silhouette of a tall man, wearing a long duster coat and a brimmed hat. He vanished as soon as I could clearly see him, yet my girlfriend was crying, whispering, "Did you see him?" I nodded, and we held each other in silence, unable to speak. Eventually, our trembling subsided, and we fell back into a restless sleep. The next morning, I said aloud, something to the effect of, "This may have been your home in the past, but it is our home now, and we're going to have to coexist with it." Remarkably, after that night, there was nothing. No lights switching on or off, no static on the TV, no footsteps, no odd feelings, just a normal, peaceful house. We never really spoke of the events again, and I never told anyone, until one day at work, the topic of paranormal experiences came up. Reluctantly, feeling a little like an insane person, I shared the story. After I mentioned the figure we had seen together, my coworker said, "Oh, the Hat Man." "The Hat Man?" I asked, incredulous. "Yeah, the Hat Man. It's a really common spirit that a lot of people claim to see," they explained. Sure enough, I looked up the Hat Man. I won't get into all the lore here, but a simple search would reveal plenty of information. I know most people will not believe me or might think I'm making this up, and perhaps even that I truly believe it myself, and am crazy, but I really do not care. It happened, it was real, and it is something I have told very, very few people. Even now, I maintain a generally skeptical mind, though perhaps slightly less so after this experience. Entities exist that we do not fully understand, and I do not doubt that. This was one of those experiences that I cannot explain, and frankly, if I go the rest of my life without another, I would be perfectly content. Story 16. This happened to me around 2006 or 2007 during the summer. My family and friends lived pretty remotely, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods, trails, and cornfields. During school, my friend told me that her family had decided to adopt a new religion, whatever that meant. She explained that they had traveled to a big city to consult a religious zealot, or medium, someone who supposedly could see things the rest of us cannot. According to my friend, the medium knew about a trail behind her house and a cornfield mixed in with the woods. Nothing particularly spooky, just common knowledge for the area. But the medium also told her that a demon, extraterrestrial, or mythical creature appears in the woods behind their home around 3:14 in the morning. It tries to communicate through my friend, which she claims is the reason she has chronic hiccups. Of course, when she told me all of this, I didn't buy into any of it. I figured it would be the perfect chance to scare a couple of our other friends. We were all close, and I happened to like one of the girls, though that part doesn't really matter here. I told the story to two of them, and we decided we'd go into the woods behind my friend's house that night to see this so-called demon ourselves. The girls drove to my house because we could walk to the trails from there. We left around 2:30 in the morning. It took about 15 minutes to reach the spot. The trail was naturally eerie, with the trees arching overhead to form a kind of tunnel made of branches and leaves. But it was a clear night, and the sound of insects and wildlife was loud and constant, so it didn't feel too creepy. Time passed. I was sitting on the ground. One friend was messing around with her flip phone, and the girl I liked was talking to me. 3:14 in the morning comes around, and I start taunting whatever this thing was supposed to be. I tossed rocks into the cornfield and into the woods nearby. About 5 minutes went by, and we decided to head back. I stood up and barely took 3 steps when everything around us went completely silent. No crickets, no rustling, nothing. Then, out of nowhere, maybe 6 feet to our right, a thick branch snapped clean in two, followed by the most ominous growl I have ever heard. I've lived there my entire life. I've hunted. I know the sounds of every animal in those woods. I had never heard anything like that before. From the sound of the branch alone, we were sure something huge was about to walk out of the brush and confront us, but nothing did. The girls jumped behind me, and we all stared at that one spot for a solid minute, trying to make sense of what we had just heard. We couldn't see a thing. It was pitch black, and our little flip phones didn't have flashlights like phones do now. I grabbed a few pebbles from the ground and tossed them toward the sound. Nothing happened. At that point, I decided it wasn't worth risking the girls' safety by going back the way we came. I told them to run in the opposite direction, and I would stay behind, just in case whatever was out there was a predator that liked to chase. Better it come after me than them. As soon as they took off, nothing followed us. Not a sound. We cut through the woods and came out onto a road that led back to my house. We made it home around 4 in the morning. To this day, I have absolutely no idea what it was. We went back a year later, and nothing strange happened again. I still hear that growl in my head sometimes, and it sends chills down my arms. Story 17. I saw a shadow person. When I was 17, I was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents owned. It was an old building in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago. His dad claimed it had once belonged to Al Capone, though I'm not sure how true that was. They let us use a top-floor apartment to hang out, and it gave us easy access to the attic. There was a lock on the attic door, but we had a key, so we could go up there and climb out onto the roof to smoke cigarettes. One night, we were about to head up, but I had to pee first. I told him I would meet him on the roof. After I was done, I went up the stairs to the attic entrance connected to the rooftop. There were no lights up there, so we always relied on our phones. To see, these were old flip phones with no flashlight, just the glow from the screen to help us navigate through the mess that was stored in the attic. As I made my way to the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. This wasn't like the shadow created by the glow of my phone. It felt solid, like a person. I followed it, thinking it was my friend, repeatedly calling out that I knew it was him and to stop messing around. The shadow passed me a few more times before moving to the other side of the attic. That's when I heard my friend's voice from downstairs. He had gotten a call from his girlfriend and had been in another room talking to her the entire time. I was completely freaked out. I knew I had been following something, so I basically jumped down the stairs. I told my friend what had happened and said I didn't want to go back up there. He agreed, so we decided to go for a walk instead. Last year, his brother mentioned in our group text that he had learned the building's designer had taken his own life in that very attic. Story 18. When I was living in London as a student, I decided to take a weekend trip with some friends to Edinburgh, Scotland. It was one of those spontaneous adventures that promised a mix of history, exploration, and perhaps a little thrill. We spent the days touring castles, walking cobblestone streets, and enjoying the local culture. One evening, we joined a night tour focused on reportedly haunted sites throughout the city. I love the history and stories of old cities, so I was intrigued, though admittedly a little skeptical about the supernatural aspects. One part of the tour brought us to Greyfriars Kirkyard, where the guide shared the story of the little ghost dog. I listened closely, fascinated by the eerie tales, yet I remained grounded in skepticism. Then the tour led us into the infamous Black Mausoleum. Despite my initial doubts, I could feel an unsettling sensation creeping over me. Something about the darkness and atmosphere made me instinctively hang back near the entrance, away from the deeper interior where the shadows seemed almost alive. Another participant, a woman not from my friend group, positioned herself a few feet away from me, similarly cautious. As the guide recounted chilling events and legends, I suddenly felt an undeniable presence at my side, right against the wall where no one should have been. The darkness amplified every sense, and then I heard it, a loud, resonating growl. It didn't sound like an animal, nor did it sound like any human could have produced it. My heart raced, and I knew instinctively that something truly strange was happening. Without thinking further, I bolted out of the mausoleum and waited anxiously outside, trying to calm my rapid breathing. When my friends emerged moments later, they immediately asked what had happened. I asked incredulously, "You didn't hear that super loud growling in there?" They shook their heads, confused, saying they had heard nothing. Interestingly, the other woman who had hung back near the entrance also came out, visibly shaken. She confirmed she had heard the same growl, precisely as I had described it, but was hesitant to say anything at first, thinking she might have imagined it. That moment solidified for me that something supernatural had occurred, and my skepticism wavered entirely. After the tour, we continued enjoying the city, exploring bars, shopping, and visiting other historic sites. The rest of the weekend passed with laughter and adventure, yet the memory of the mausoleum lingered like a shadow at the back of my mind. Once we returned to London by train, I thought the strange experiences were behind me. However, the very next morning, as I got out of bed to prepare for classes, I almost fell to the floor. The entire right side of my body was numb, rendering walking and movement difficult. At first, I assumed I had simply slept awkwardly on the train or pinched a nerve, but the numbness persisted. Concerned, I called a friend from my graduate program who had previously trained as a doctor. He rushed over and insisted I visit urgent care immediately. At the hospital, I underwent extensive testing, including scans, blood work, and neurological evaluations. Despite all efforts, the doctors found no medical explanation for my sudden paralysis. While I was resting up at my flat, things grew increasingly weirder. I shared the flat with 3 flatmates, 2 women and 1 man. One of the women was blonde, and the other was quite short with dark, wavy hair. The man was taller than me, with an athletic build. These details became important later. After returning from Edinburgh, bizarre events started happening in our London flat almost immediately. Doors opened and closed, seemingly on their own, while we were all gathered in one area, and nobody was near the door when it moved. Electronics began acting strangely too, being knocked off surfaces without explanation. A computer, an iPad, and our telephone all toppled from tables in ways that made no sense. On one occasion, one of my flatmates, another classmate, and I were sitting in the living room when our corded phone slowly slid toward the edge of the table and then fell to the floor, as if someone had deliberately nudged it very gently, but with intent. The small, deliberate nature of the movements was unnerving and impossible to ignore. Initially, the male flatmate was extremely skeptical about any paranormal activity. He repeatedly insisted that we were imagining things, and that it was ridiculous to think anything supernatural was occurring. Yet, as incidents continued with increasing frequency and strangeness, even he reluctantly admitted that something unusual and unexplainable was happening in the flat. The tension built gradually, leading to what became the strangest, most chilling event of them all. One night, we were all in the living room together, the evening stretching late. Our dark, wavy-haired flatmate, who was the shorter of the 2 women, decided to go to bed. The rest of us continued talking while slowly moving toward our respective rooms. At one point, we were all standing in the hallway near the bedrooms, which is important to describe for clarity. The living room was across from the kitchen. If you turned left out of the living room, there were doors directly opposite each other. The left led to the dark-haired flatmate's room, and the right led to the male flatmate's room. As the hallway conversation continued, I remained in the living room, scrolling on my phone and texting my crush at the time. Eventually, I got up to join the conversation happening between the blonde flatmate and the male flatmate. They were discussing when an assignment was due, as the date had recently changed, and I wanted to join in on the discussion to clarify. As I stepped out of the living room, someone I assumed was the dark-haired flatmate walked directly in front of me. I nearly bumped into her and quickly apologized for almost colliding. She did not respond and appeared to continue toward the bathroom, which was past the kitchen toward the flat's entrance. I assumed she had gotten up to use the bathroom. When I approached the hallway conversation, she was still in the bathroom, had not emerged, and had not gone past me into her room, which I was standing in front of. The situation felt strange, but not yet impossible. We continued talking in the hallway when, suddenly, our dark-haired flatmate chimed in with her thoughts on the topic. However, she was not coming from the bathroom at all. She was in her room. I opened her door and found her sitting on her bed, calmly talking to us from there. My immediate reaction was disbelief. "How did you get past us back into your room?" She replied that she had not left her room at all. The other two flatmates were equally confused because they also thought they had seen her walking toward the bathroom at the same time I had. None of us could explain what had passed in front of us, and the mystery was compounded when we checked the bathroom. There was no one there, of course, but then I noticed something even stranger. All of our shampoo, body wash, and other toiletries had been arranged in a circle in the middle of the tub, clearly not placed there by anyone. The deliberate and unnatural arrangement created a palpable sense of unease, cementing this as the most unsettling moment of our experiences in the flat. Even after that night, doors continued to open and close on their own, and a pervasive, strange energy lingered in the flat. On one occasion, I was alone while these events occurred. Frustrated and seeking some control, I yelled firmly, "I'm just studying, and don't mind that you're here, but please leave me alone in my room." Remarkably, the activity stopped after that command, leaving a quiet sense of relief. Eventually, we decided to consult someone who specialized in spirit and energy work. They assessed the flat and shared their insight, explaining that I likely came into contact with witchcraft while in Edinburgh, which had followed me back to London. They performed a clearing ritual and assured us it would stop the disturbances. Indeed, after their intervention, nothing unusual happened in the flat again. Even after more than a decade, the experience remains vivid in my memory, a chilling yet fascinating reminder of how fragile and strange our reality can sometimes be. Story 19. When I was a kid, I started having these dreams, nightmares, really, night terrors. In one of them, I woke up to see a little girl sitting at the foot of my bed. She looked maybe 8 or 9 years old, and I was not quite 6. She had moved all of my stuffed animals out of the way and was using the small pillow I used for watching movies to prop herself up like she was lounging. She smiled at me and said we were going to be best friends very soon. She looked excited in a way that completely terrified me. There were a few other things about her appearance that scared me as well, but I don't want that image stuck in my head this late at night. I woke up screaming around 5 in the morning and tried to tell my mom what had happened. She let me fall asleep with the TV on. The next night, I heard a car pull into the driveway right outside the window. I thought it was my dad coming home, so I went to greet him, but I froze when I heard what sounded like rowdy, drunken teenagers. Then the girl called to me, telling me to come meet her friends. I said no, thank you, because I didn't want to get into trouble. She kept calling to me, urging me to just look outside. I had a large window, so I would only have to turn my head slightly, but I felt as though doing so would be like inviting her in, so I didn't. Instead, I went to the farthest corner of the room and tucked myself behind a barricade of both my toy bins. I saw her a few more times after that. She always wanted me to either look into her eyes or hold her hand. I heard the car pull up almost every night, but she was not with the rowdy people for a long while. They teased me for being weak and said I was going to hell one way or another, so I should at least earn some brownie points. One night, when I thought they had finally left me alone, the girl brought me to her house. I was still in my bed, but I was inside the image she was showing me. She showed me her backyard, the large kitchen, the dining room. It looked grand. I grew up in a house that was nearly condemned, so it looked like a mansion to me. Then she showed me her room and told me she could not wait for me to move in. Shortly after, I moved in with my grandparents for the summer. I could not handle the darkness at home, and my parents did not believe what I was experiencing at night. Nothing happened at my grandparents' house at first, except I heard the car the first night, and the second. No one else heard anything. One night, I hid under the covers, fixating on the nightlight in the hall, so I would not accidentally look out the window. My grandfather's mother appeared in the doorway. I had never met her, but I instantly knew who she was, and that she was there to help. I started to speak, but she quickly put a finger to her lips and told me to stay hidden until the birds sing. Do not be fooled when they say you are safe once the sun comes out. Wait for the birds. I told my mother, and she said I should never go against anything her grandmother tells me. That summer, we were moving. I only saw a couple of houses with my parents, and they did not care about my opinion. One day, I was excited to see 2 houses because the only other one I had seen was tiny, miserable, and falling apart. The first one was warm and homey. The second was an hour away. It was her house. I begged, cried, and pleaded not to go inside. I told them I did not want to live with the girl. My parents said I should be excited because I would get to live with my imaginary friend. I described the house to them in detail, and they were thrilled, finally believing what I had been dealing with. They could not have been happier, and I was terrified. Let's just say my mental health unraveled. I lived in hell for 5 years. Luckily, my father started having issues and stopped paying bills to feed his addiction. We lost the house and moved a few times. Things always seemed to get better before they got worse. I am in my 20s now, and I never feel like I can be alone. Edit. I just found out a couple of days ago that this was the result of recurring seizures that I eventually grew out of. I do not have many memories from that time because of all the medication I was on, due to pre-existing medical issues, but it gives me peace of mind to have that information now. Story 20. Our house always felt haunted, though I hadn't thought much about it in years since I no longer lived there. Recently, my younger sister began experiencing strange and unsettling events, which made me realize I wasn't imagining things. Even a cousin had heard eerie sounds alongside her, leaving little doubt that some unseen presence shared the house with us. I never felt threatened or unsafe. It seemed more like a quiet observer, curious and ever-present, watching from the shadows without intent to harm. For me, everything started when I was around 9 or 10 years old and moved to the top floor of the house, which is where my sister eventually stayed too. My brother and I never adjusted well to that floor, even though we had always had separate rooms from our parents. When we moved upstairs, something simply felt wrong. We had 2 separate rooms across from one another with a bathroom situated between them. We ended up sleeping together for quite a while because the uneasy atmosphere made us feel unsafe. There wasn't proper air filtration when we first moved up there, so the place carried an odd and unsettling smell. We would joke nervously that the scent reminded us of something related to death, even though we knew that made no logical sense. From my bed, I could look straight into the bathroom because it had no door, and I could see directly into the huge mirror across from the sink and toilet. I swear that sometimes I would see a dark figure reflected in that mirror. The figure never made noise and never moved anything, but I would occasionally catch sight of a shadowy shape. I was a strange kid, and instead of being terrified, I would try to be kind and speak to her before bed. I was very lonely when we first moved into that house and did not have many friends, so I guess I decided to make friends with a shadowy presence. Something inside me was convinced it was a girl. I even gave her a name, although it has been so many years that I can't remember what I called her. Eventually, once my brother and I settled into the new house and I made more friends, I slowly forgot about my shadow companion. But there were still moments when I felt watched, or I saw something dart in the corner of my vision that looked like a shadow shaped almost exactly like my mom. One memory has never faded. I was at the kitchen table doing something, and from the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like my mom hiding playfully behind the fridge. I laughed and called out to her, assuming she was joking around, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. A moment later, my mom called from her bedroom, asking what I wanted. I still remember that shadow perfectly. Soon, the top floor went under construction because the heating and air conditioning were failing, so my brother and I were moved into a room on the 2nd floor near our parents. Nothing strange happened there until my sister was born and reached around 3 years old. That was when I started noticing very unusual things whenever she slept. I would sneak out after my parents went to bed and stay up late in the living room watching George Lopez and Degrassi. Very little happened directly to me, but I began seeing odd things involving my sister. Sometimes she would suddenly wake and walk around, half asleep, but appearing oddly aware. I don't think it was traditional sleepwalking because she seemed somewhat coherent, and if I told her to go back to bed, she would. As she grew older, she talked more in her sleep, and since we shared a bed for a while, I heard her mumble about McDonald's or random things she liked. I never thought much of it until one night. I went to use the bathroom and found her curled tightly on the floor, sobbing her eyes out. I reached out to comfort her, thinking she had a nightmare, and she shot up instantly, saying in the coldest voice, "I'm fine. I'm going back to sleep now." I was so unsettled that I just stayed with her that night. Another night, I was on Skype with friends while lying in bed beside her when she suddenly bolted upright, stared at me, and whispered, "Help me," before collapsing back into sleep. My friends on the call heard everything and stayed awake with me for most of the night because we were all so shaken. Not long after that, I had my grandmother help me bless the house. Those strange moments decreased significantly afterward, though I still tried to convince myself it had been my imagination. There were a few more unusual moments with my sister. Once she reached kindergarten, she developed a fascination with ghosts and insisted our house had one. My dad loved horror movies, so I assumed she had taken after him. Still, her bravery surprised me, and I felt oddly proud because I had been a little wuss when I was younger. One afternoon, after her first Christian class, I walked into the living room and found her book open, several candles lit, and her chanting for the spirit in the house to come forward. It was broad daylight, yet the scene unsettled me deeply. Another time, my family returned from a trip overseas after visiting my grandfather's grave. My mom and sister came to greet me, and our dog Sophie raced into the room, then stopped abruptly with her hair raised and teeth showing at an empty corner. The blinds were closed, so it wasn't an animal outside, and Sophie was the friendliest dog imaginable, so I doubted it was a familiar spirit. My sister skipped around excitedly, saying she had tried to summon our grandfather at his grave and believed he came home with us. I wasn't convinced, and the way the dog reacted made me believe it wasn't him. I watched my mom turn pale before she walked out quickly, brushing it off as nothing. Anyway, now on to my sister's more recent experiences. She is older now, still interested in the paranormal, but much more cautious. She has heard a girl whispering and often feels watched. She's a teenager now and has heard things like my mom calling her when she didn't, or me talking to her when I wasn't even home. One incident happened around a year and a half ago when I stayed over at my parents' place while my cousin visited. They woke me the next morning, asking why I had run up and down the stairs in the middle of the night, pretending to go back to sleep. They thought I was teasing them for sneaking onto the roof. I was confused because I had been asleep the entire night, and their faces went pale once they realized that. My cousin told my grandmother, and she performed another blessing. Now whenever she comes over, she prays constantly. She has always been that way, but through one of my uncles, I learned that she genuinely believes something was or still is in the house. My parents dismiss it, but I haven't heard anything new from my sister recently. Even so, I hope whoever or whatever that entity was is at peace now. I do believe we were friends at one point, and as I grew older and less lonely, I drifted away from her. I truly hope she found the comfort she needed. Story 21. This story isn't mine. It belongs entirely to my father, Nidar Rames. Since my sister and I were little, we grew up hearing it around campfires or during sleepovers every single summer. My dad swears by every detail, and after countless retellings, I know it by heart. It happened when he was 16 years old. Born in 1969, the story took place one summer during a family camping and hunting trip up in northern Minnesota, right along the remote Canadian border. My dad has always been a survival fanatic, endlessly curious, and remarkably skilled in reading the land, wildlife, and vegetation wherever he goes. The summer he turned 16, his family once again journeyed to their usual northern Minnesota camping spot, right along the Canadian border. That year, only his immediate family and an older couple had checked into the campsite nearby. His family knew the couple well, as they made a point of being friendly with neighbors, even though the couple's site was likely miles from where my dad's family had set up. One day, my dad decided to explore deeper into the woods near the gravel road. Feeling the crisp northern Minnesota air on his face, he spotted a berry bush growing at the roadside, and recognizing the berries as edible, plucked a few to snack on slowly, savoring their sweetness before moving along. Aware that bears and mountain lions roamed the area, especially near the animal feeding site, he carefully carved a small spear from a tree sapling for protection. With the spear in hand, he constantly glanced over his shoulder, every sense alert, listening for any sudden crack of branches or rustle of leaves that could signal danger, knowing that in these remote woods, help would be miles away. As he turned his head again, he froze in disbelief. At first, he thought he saw an 8-foot-tall, unclothed black man crossing the gravel road, but something about the figure felt completely wrong. Only his family and an older couple were camping miles away, so a stranger made no sense in this isolated location. Within seconds, his mind reeled with shock and recognition. This was not a human. The massive creature had dark brown-black fur and moved with unnatural strength and precision, crossing the wide road in just 3 giant strides. It was exactly what people described as Bigfoot. Before he could react further, a smaller Bigfoot appeared behind the first one. This one dragged a trash bag along, and sunlight glinting off its fur revealed a cinnamon-colored hue, a stark contrast to the darker adult. Fear surged through him like ice in his veins, but he forced himself to run back to the campsite, heart pounding. His youngest brother, Michael, was waiting, and the moment he saw my dad's pale, wide-eyed face, he knew something was terribly wrong. "Sammy, what's the matter? You look like you've seen a ghost," he asked nervously. My dad hesitated, trying to think of a believable excuse. "Nothing, I tripped on a root," he muttered, hoping Michael would believe him. But Michael's curiosity was insistent. "No, come on, something happened. Tell me." My dad exhaled sharply and whispered, "Okay, don't tell Dad, but I saw Bigfoot, 2 of them." Michael's eyes grew wide. "No way, you didn't," he exclaimed. "Yes, I did," my dad insisted firmly. Michael demanded, "Then take me there. Show me exactly where you saw them." Handing Michael his spear and quickly carving another for himself, my dad said, "Here, take this. I'll need one too, just in case." Carefully, they retraced his steps into the part of the woods where the creatures had disappeared. Soon, they found 2 enormous footprints in the mud, with a smaller set beside them. Panic surged, and my dad bolted back toward the campsite, thinking Michael was following. Then Michael's terrified voice cut through the forest. "Sammy! Sammy!" Terrified, my dad spun around, fearing Michael had been left behind and might be attacked. He raced back and found Michael crouched over a small ravine, pointing at the ground. "Sammy, look!" Michael cried. My dad leaned closer, trying to steady himself. What is it?" he asked, voice shaking. Michael whispered, "Oh my God." There, in the mud, were 2 massive footprints next to a smaller pair, perfectly parallel, as if the Bigfoot had jumped in and out of the ravine. The larger footprints were at least a foot long, possibly longer. Shaken and exhausted, they decided to head back as darkness approached, already terrified by the encounter. Back at the campsite, Michael couldn't resist telling Grandpa everything. Skeptical, Grandpa approached my dad and said, "Sammy, I don't think any Christian has ever seen a Bigfoot." My dad responded firmly, "I did. I saw 2 of them." Grandpa demanded proof. After a tense silence, he finally asked, "So how long did it take you guys to make these tracks?" My dad felt a rush of frustration and disbelief, knowing what he had seen was real, and that Michael should not have told Grandpa, who might never believe them. The next morning, my dad, his 3 brothers, and Grandpa set out on a 5-mile hike into the woods for hunting at sunrise. Suddenly, Grandpa froze, staring intently at the forest floor. My dad followed his gaze and froze too. More enormous footprints were etched clearly in the mud, unmistakable and undeniable. Grandpa's eyes widened, realization dawning. He immediately understood that my dad could not have predicted their path, nor fabricated the tracks overnight, miles into the dense woods. My dad recalls seeing genuine fear in Grandpa's eyes, a rare, unforgettable expression from a man normally stern, harsh, and intimidating. After that trip, my dad's family never returned to that campsite again. Nearly 20 years ago, his oldest brother, Jonathan, revisited the site, now marked with numerous Bigfoot warning signs, following many reported sightings over the years. While I may still question the existence of Bigfoot myself, one thing remains certain. My dad has never doubted what he saw, and his story is a chilling, unforgettable memory for all of us. Story 22. A few strange stories from my mobile. 1. When I was a toddler, I vaguely remember my 2 young aunts, who were teens at the time, suddenly picking me up and running downstairs while screaming and crying. They said something was chasing them, and they jumped onto a couch pressed against a wall and cowered there with me squeezed tightly between them. I also have a half-uncle who always claimed that the property was truly haunted. He and others said they saw eerie doppelgangers of each other, and he even said he was pushed down a flight of stairs. That place still slips into my dreams, but in those dreams, the house is crumbled and frogs fill the broken rooms, and there is a silent, sad kind of heavy energy. In one dream, an unsettling old church sat on the property, as it had always belonged there. 2. After being passed around in the system, I was adopted into a highly religious family. They were the type whose strictness turned into harmful behavior, and I honestly think the harsh energy they created might have attracted unsettling spirits. The house had once been an old Grange building called the Pinhook Grange, until they bought it and turned it into a home for all the kids they adopted. It sat on an acre of land surrounded completely by fields. One evening, right at twilight. I was listening to music and swinging outside, enjoying the quiet, when a shadow darted past me just as I swung upward. A second later, one chain on the swing snapped. Thankfully, I had already tightened my grip the instant I saw that shadow streak by. I refused to go near that part of the property for quite some time after that. A few other strange things happened there too, but I still have more stories. 3. Later, after leaving that family, I moved in with my half-uncle and his family in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, for a couple of months. During that time, I worked for an antique dealer in downtown Oshkosh. About 1 or 2 weeks before I officially started the job, he messaged me while I was homesick in bed. He asked what I wanted, and I told him I didn't understand the question. He said his parents told him a young girl had come into the shop asking to speak to him, and when they described her, she sounded exactly like me. I told him I had been home unwell the entire day and had never gone near the shop. He went on to see my doppelganger about 2 or 3 more times, and each time, it happened right after I had just stepped out of a room. It always appeared in different clothes than the ones he had just seen me wearing. It unsettled both of us deeply. Other strange things were happening during my time there, but the doppelganger was the scariest. It felt like it wanted to imitate me, but clearly, I was too special for it to succeed in taking my place. 4. A while later, my ex-husband and I were in Chicago. I went into a public restroom for a moment, and while my ex was waiting for me, he happened to glance over at the crowd near him. My doppelganger had shown itself again. It was hanging off the arm of another man, and my ex said he genuinely thought it was me ditching him. That version of me was even wearing a dress almost identical to mine. That was the last confirmed time anyone I know has ever seen it. 5. After my divorce, I began dating a man who bought property out in the countryside. He had 5 acres of woods and 2 acres with a house and barn, scattered with old trees. More than 100 years earlier, a very small town had existed in that area, and part of the woods near a side road held an unmarked cemetery. Before I even knew that, there was one corner of the woods I refused to enter. A peculiar-looking tree stood in a tiny clearing, and something about that place felt deeply wrong. In my mind's eye, I could sense figures standing there, and at night, it felt like they stood at the edge of the woods, just watching the house. My cat refused to leave my side at night, almost as if he was guarding me, and he always stared out the window at the exact spot where I could feel those shapes lingering. Somehow, I managed to make my demand clear, and whatever they were, they never stepped out of that clearing. I also think something else, something different, may have been trying to protect me and push me away from the property and from him. While he was gone on a business trip, things got unbearable between us. I was treated so terribly that I tried to off myself. Something kept me safe. Something held me steady until help reached me. When I returned home afterward, he made a horrible comment, and the moment he said it, something inside me felt a powerful urge to run away from him and the property. It was like the land itself wanted me gone before anything worse happened. It took my attempt to off myself for me to be pulled out of whatever danger was waiting there. My life was never easy, and it felt like everything fell apart after that first attempt to off myself. But whatever strange energy protected me from that property kept pushing me forward until I reached where I am now, with an incredible man who is my best friend, my partner, and my soulmate. Thank you, whoever you were, for leading me to the life I have today. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.